Welcome to the White House Hangout on Startup America. I'm sorry we're running a few minutes late. Really excited to be joined by Steve Case and Aneesh Chopra. Gene Sperling should be here any minute. With that, I'll turn it over to Steve for an introduction, then to Aneesh, and we'll get right to your questions.
Well, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining. It's an exciting time. We launched the Startup America Partnership a year ago this week, and we've now have 18 startup regions where we've rolled this out, and also about 50 companies now are providing resources. So I'd encourage you to look at the startupamericapartnership.org site to get some sense of what some of those resources are. So that's one thing I do. I also, in addition, I'm focused working with the White House and Congress on some legislation related to entrepreneurship. We'll talk about that as well. And my day job is backing companies through my firm Revolution. We back companies like Zipcar and Living Social and so forth. So we're very pro-entrepreneur and love to have this opportunity to talk with a lot of you all around the country about entrepreneurship.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. My name is Aneesh Chopra. I'm the President's Chief Technology Officer. Part of my responsibility is to bring about entrepreneurial focus to health, energy, education, and some of the biggest challenges the country faces. As Steve mentioned, we took a lot of input as part of the Startup America collaboration, understanding where we had barriers that were inhibiting economic growth and a success for our startup community. We listened to that feedback, and on earlier this week on Tuesday, the president at a cabinet meeting announced to the press and to the Congress a set of legislative items that he wished to support. Most of them have bipartisan support in the Congress to lower some of the barriers that we're seeing and to provide more tax credit support for entrepreneurs and address some of the challenges in our immigration system focused on some of the areas that are important for high growth entrepreneurship. And so we've had a lot of fun working with Steve and the partnership, and look forward to engaging with all of you on the questions today.
Excellent. Well, let's get right to it. I'm going to start with Graham and Kylie over there in the lower left-hand corner.
Okay, hi. Our question is about what the president mentioned during the State of the Union. He talked about incentives for companies that created jobs in the U.S. as opposed to overseas. And I wanted to know what type of companies had access to those incentives for creating jobs specifically in the U.S. and whether or not that would be accessible to entrepreneurs with early stage companies who are only hiring maybe 3, 4, or 5 people. And I guess a follow-up to that is, and how can Startup Missouri really help that if that incentive exists?
Before we get to the response, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Gene Sperling, the director of the National Economic Council. I'll turn it over to Gene for a brief introduction, then we'll get right back to your question.
Hi, this is Gene Sperling. I'm the President's National Economic Advisor, and very, very happy to be here. And you know what? I won't hold things up more with intro comments, just to say that, you know, this president has been enormously committed to entrepreneurship and small business. This was what he hit when he did the American Jobs Act. He put many of the ideas out. He obviously made this a major part of his State of the Union. And these are things we believe we can get done. And I think the reason why everyone here is so important is that as partisan as things are here, as dysfunctional as we are here in Washington sometimes, I do believe, and I know Steve Case feels this way, that entrepreneurship is one of the things we could still come together on in 2012. Now, to answer your question, when the president looks at what kind of tax incentives you want to give when you are already in a very tough fiscal situation, he wants to make sure they are actually going to be the types of incentives that are not just good for companies, but we can also say they're going to be important for job creation, innovation, entrepreneurship in the United States. And if there's one thing that unites the themes of the different tax incentives that he's given, it's exactly that. What actually is going to mean higher value, higher innovation, greater jobs, higher wages here in the U.S. So some of that goes to things like the R&E tax credit, where you get a tax cut for doing R&E here. That has to be done in the United States, and the benefit goes beyond the company. We as a country benefit when there's more innovation, more research taking place here. Manufacturing, the president has given a great encouragement in manufacturing, talking about a lower rate for manufacturing, doubling the deduction for manufacturing for people who are creating jobs here. having a global minimum tax so that when people are trying to figure out where are they going to locate jobs, they don't think they should be part of a race to the bottom where they are going to a tax haven. They're thinking about the important things. What's the workforce? What's the best place to locate and create jobs? And then on small business, the reason why the president has always been so aggressive on small business tax relief, whether it's the zero capital gains for investment held in small companies with 50 million or less revenues, the reason why he's offered a tax cut for small businesses, increasing their hiring now, the reason why we've proposed the different measures for access to capital financing for IPOs is quite simply, this is innovation that is not only good for the innovator or the particular person, but for the economy as a whole. You know you're creating jobs, they stay here. You know you're not thinking from day one, how do you simply use how is that going to be outsourced? You're thinking, how are you building job growth here in our communities so that you can sell in global markets, but that job growth is fundamentally here. So again, in a tight budget, the president's looking for what are the tax incentives for entrepreneurship, for small business, for manufacturers that are going to mean job creation here at home.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Steve, Aneesh, I open it to you. Otherwise, we can move on to another question.
I just want to add one thing to what Gene said. First of all, I should thank Gene for the leadership he's been providing at the White House. The rollout earlier this week by the president of the Startup America legislative agenda, he and his team has been spending a lot of time on it, so I appreciate that. There are a lot of different components to it. He talks about some of the tax incentives. Another area that's really important that will help a lot of young startup companies and companies starting to ramp up is what's called crowdfunding, using some of the platforms that have developed that can help fund a project like a documentary to now fund a company. And so that's very important. That again has bipartisan support. So that's one of the things we need to get done in the next couple of months as part of this Startup America agenda. Gene also mentioned trying to have an on-ramp for IPOs. Companies are growing fast, are less likely to go public these days because of the cost of that. And sometimes instead of going public, they get sold. And it's better to have them go public and have access to capital so they can grow and create more jobs. So there's a variety of different components. What I'm excited by is there really is bipartisan support. People want to get this done. So even though it's a tough election year and the partisanship here in Washington, D.C. is really tough on these issues of entrepreneurship and giving them the tools they need to be successful, there is bipartisan support. And hopefully over the next couple of months with push from all you folks in the entrepreneurial community, the tech community, other communities to get Washington focused on this, I think we can get something passed and signed by the president in the next couple of months.
Okay.
And Corey, I'll just add one comment, perhaps a theme for the rest of the Hangout. There are certain provisions that are live now that you might be able to take advantage of for your members in Startup Missouri. Number one, for students who are leaving college with a lot of debt, the president announced an income-based repayment program that essentially caps the amount of money they have to spend on their student loans while they get a new business off the ground. So on the one hand, you want to raise money, but if you can also lower the cost of starting a new business, that's a benefit too. So that provision is today at 15%. We're going to soon roll that out at 10% of their income, which I think is going to be a big opportunity for student entrepreneurs. And then in a related note, the president's judgment to expand access to the parents' health insurance program through the age of 26 has been another cost reducer for entrepreneurs. So I just think it's important to see what's live now and what's been proposed. So those are two that are live.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I'm going to kick it over to Jeffrey to pose the next question to the group.
All right. Thanks for inviting me to join the Hangout. I really do appreciate everyone's time. My name's Jeff Nesson, and I am the CEO of a startup IT services company. We're focused on helping companies make a transition from traditional IT product sales over to solution sales, which is really the trend in the industry. And we do that really by helping make it easier for them to sell services, as easy to sell services or easier than it is to sell product. And so, we think there's a lot of value that technology brings. Obviously, this is a great demonstration of that. My question is, as I look through the Startup America website, what I see in there is a lot of information about traditional, already existing types of things that we have access to. And I was wondering if the Startup America Partnership is going to come up with its own sort of value add that we can take advantage of either through the website or any other way.
Well, let me start, and others could add to that. I think we launched the partnership, announced it about a year ago, started hiring people in the spring, started assembling partners in the summer, and then launched the first version of the startupamericapartnership.org website in the fall. And so we have done, the focus in the year really was getting launched and aggregating resources from existing companies who could provide either free access to things, software, for example, to help you get started, or discounted access, or mentoring services, or things like that. So we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We really wanted to go to organizations that already exist. They're doing some things in the space and figure out ways to accelerate their efforts to reach more companies and help more startups. So that really was the first wave where we really wanted to get up and running. But we're the first to say Startup America Partnership is a startup. We're just getting going. And one of the important things is getting feedback in terms of additional resources that would be helpful. And it obviously depends on what sector you're in, sometimes what region you're in, which is why we've launched these startup regions. We're now up to 18 regions. We had, I think, 9 launched this week, and we recognize that although what we can provide at a national level in terms of resources is important, ultimately what happens in each of these regions is where the rubber meets the road because of the uniqueness of each region. So we welcome you to give us feedback on what we can do at the national level, but also get involved in what's happening at a regional level. And if there isn't yet a startup region in your area, help us launch one.
And if you don't mind, Corey, I might add a comment on this in terms of what's new. Some of the growth markets, the jobs and industries of the future, actually are in some of these regulated or semi-regulated markets, industries like healthcare, energy, and education that really haven't had the kind of productivity gains that normally are associated with industries that have incorporated IT, perhaps as your firm might make available. So to give you a flavor of how we're kind of bringing some new approaches to this, we have just a week ago, we announced this summit, a care delivery innovation summit, how we're going to change the way the healthcare system works by changing incentives to payers and to doctors and hospitals around the country. So a company called Sanofi Aventis, this is a large multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company, sees an opportunity to incorporate information technology to better manage patients with diabetes. They announced a partnership with the Startup America Partnership where they're going to offer a $250,000 prize to the best company idea to help folks manage their diabetes using the power of information technology. It's basically an open innovation program where Sanofi, for the first time, is opening up its own business development function, looking at partners and harnessing the Startup America Partnership ecosystem so that the companies that they support, some will make it through their prize hurdle and others that may not make it still have good and viable products, and they're going to get support services. They did this last year, and the winning app that they picked is from a company called Ginger.io. They raised $1.7 million, hired 7 people, and hit the ground running as a startup because they're able to tap into this open innovation program. You're seeing that in health, energy, and education, where we're bringing policy changes and innovation together to create new market opportunities.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Thanks for your question, Jeff. Hey, Julie, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah, hi. Oh my gosh, this is so fun. I love this Google Plus Hangout thing where we're able to do this all together. I can't get over how cool this is. Hi, Steve. Hi, Jean. Hi, Aneesh. First of all, Steve, I'm a huge fan of yours. My company is a startup in South Florida called Made in USA Certified, and I'm a member of Startup America.
Great.
And I actually met Danielle and Erica on the plane coming back from DC, which was so strange, and they got me to sign up. And
Good. I'm glad they're working the planes.
they were working JetBlue for sure. and Aneesh, I was coming back actually from seeing you speak in DC at the Council on Competitiveness.
Oh, great.
Yeah, you did a great job, and
Thank you.
I love what all of you guys are doing. And Jean, you guys at the White House, the last State of the Union was a great, great speech by the president. I love the focus on U.S. manufacturing. Obviously, our company, Made in USA Certified, certifies companies' products that are manufactured in the United States to verify compliance with U.S. laws and regulations in regards to claiming that they're made in USA or product of USA. We also do service in USA certified for call centers and software developers, because we want to see a lot of those jobs coming back to the United States as well. So since I'm a huge fan of all three of you, like seriously, this is a rock star moment for me. I want to know how Made in USA Certified can work together with the White House and Startup America to help support U.S. manufacturers here in the United States, make sure that federal funds for the Buy American Act and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act are going to true American companies that are really manufacturing here. I think it's really important that there's some accountability out there in terms of companies that are claiming that they're manufacturing products here in the United States, and that's what we do. So I want to work together with you guys and create some kind of a coalition to support that. And that was kind of my question. So what can we do to work together?
So, first of all, I think I think you have to have slighter, higher aspirations for rock stars than Aneesh and I.
Really? Okay.
I do know Bono, so maybe, we can, try to get you a real rock star. But Steve, maybe. But listen, in all seriousness, this is an issue we are talking about around the White House. I mean, we're aware of the issue. We're aware of whether, it's been updated enough, whether it's as modern as it should be. So I'd be very interested in talking to you, in the next couple of days and seeing what you're doing, because I think it's a very important issue. And, the president has spoken those words, Made in America, several times, including the State of the Union, the American Jobs Act speech. So, I think it's very important. We want it to be modern. We want it to be up to date. But I think what you're saying about, understanding what is certified, what qualifies, is a very interesting topic to us. So we'll figure out how to talk after this.
Okay, cool.
And I'll just, maybe the one thing that I'd add is part of our theory of transparency is that you see on recovery.gov all of the dollars that we are spending. And so one of the benefits of having an open transparency initiative is it allows folks like you and others to say, look, we're taking a look at the data and we're finding things that are interesting and perhaps worthy of some kind of a reaction. We've seen this happen, for example, in other standards areas like Energy Star. I was in New York City just about a week and a half ago at a Clean Web hackathon, and a young guy built over the weekend an app that took Energy Star data and retail pricing data and created something called Econify, which allowed consumers to know when they're buying a washing machine or an appliance, a fridge of sorts, that they could cross-tabulate the Energy Star ratings, which come from government databases, with the retail pricing data that comes kind of like your traditional shopping service. And he built it in a weekend, a very thoughtful customer interface, so that the power of the consumer in determining whether or not they wanted to use that other data in making a purchase decision. It's the power of open government. It's the power of open data. We love the fact that he could build that kind of capability, and maybe your Buy America standard might have another kind of mashup that looks into these. So we'd be very keen to hear your thoughts. But again, you don't have to ask permission to use open government data. You can just, as any American can, visit data.gov and take advantage of that open resource and build apps that might benefit the American people.
The only guy to add is thank you for becoming a Startup America Partnership company. We want to get all the startups that can use some of these resources and benefit from some of the regional activities signed up. So for those companies out there or entrepreneurs who are thinking of whether it's an idea phase or a startup or a ramp up or a speed up, there's 4 different phases. You'll see that on the startupamericapartnership.org site. We really want to be helpful, and the best way to be helpful is to get companies signed up, starting to use the things that are there and suggest new things that we can add to make it easier to scale your companies.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Julie. I'm going to turn it over to Nicholas.
Hi, I'm a video blogger. I'm in Denmark. I'm a big fan of Google, and they have the 20% time. I'm wondering if you can do something like encourage more companies to have 20% time, like all over the country. Is that a good idea, do you think? I hope it's relevant.
All you, Steve.
Do you want to explain for folks that aren't aware what the 20% time at Google is all about?
So as far as I understand, like all the employees at Google, they can do whatever they want 20% of the time, right? And they still get a salary, like they still get paid to basically do whatever they want. And it's kind of successful for Google, right? So why can't it be successful for the rest of the country, for every company in society?
Well, I'll start and others can add to it. I think obviously Google's been tremendously successful. I think the 20% program they put in place has helped do that because it's attracted people who might not otherwise have come. And some of the ideas that they did in their 20% time have led to some great successful products and services, Google News and many other things. So it clearly has worked for them. And I think it is something that many other companies should look at. Obviously, it depends on the nature of the kind of work people are doing and how they could best use that 20%. So I'm not sure it's the kind of thing that applies all the time. If you're working in a restaurant, for example, you probably not practical for you to take 20% off of your time off. But for many companies, particularly services, technology kinds of companies, it is something that could make a lot of sense. And I think other companies are learning from that. One of the great things about this entrepreneur community is people watch what's happening and see what some of the success stories are and try to emulate that and learn from it. So the best ideas start in one place and over time are spread more broadly.
I don't know if we would comment on the 20% time, but I'll just use this as a chance to say a word or two about how we're trying to change the way Washington works. I'll just share 3 brief anecdotes. Number one, we're celebrating innovators in the government itself who come up with ideas that are beneficial to the American taxpayer. So the president launched the SAVE Award to celebrate frontline workers with great ideas. And so we're trying to create that culture of innovation and entrepreneurship inside the government. 2, we have attracted entrepreneurs to come work in the government, even if it's temporary. Our Food and Drug Administration wants to redesign the way medical devices are regulated or managed, if you will. So we recruited some of the brightest minds in the country. Dean Kamen, who invented the Segway, Bill Hawkins, the former CEO of Medtronic. These are some of the brightest minds in the country. We've invited them to be on the government payroll at a massive pay cut, I might add, but to serve as either an advisor or an on-the-ground partner to bring about some structural change. And that's a new way of doing business in Washington. We've had them on board for 3 months, and they're supposed to finish over the next 3. And then third, we're increasingly tapping into the open innovation community. We are issuing challenges, prizes, and competitions so that the American people can compete and solve global problems, or at least the U.S. version of those problems. Lowering healthcare costs, improving energy efficiency, addressing the educational quality challenges. These are opportunities. Now, it's not the 20% time per se, but it's about the spirit of bringing about a new way of thinking in a structured and thoughtful way, and we're trying to take those lessons inside Washington.
So maybe one idea is to take this 20% time idea and apply it to the Congress. Maybe they should take 20% of their time and spend it with entrepreneurs, helping understand what's happening, because they really are the job creators and the innovators that are ensuring our competitiveness. And then they'll all come home and quickly pass the Startup America legislative package. So thank you for that idea. We'll take it and run with it.
Thanks so much, Nicholas. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tyler, who's been patiently waiting for a while over there.
No, it's fine. Definitely more important to hear from the folks who are head first into this. We cover their efforts a lot here at Fast Company magazine. But one thing I wanted to ask about was part of the legislative agenda. Steve mentioned it. That was unveiled on Tuesday, is to increase crowdfunding. I'm curious about which crowdfunding projects you plan to use as models, and how can those models be extended to support business beyond the first projects that they do?
I'll defer to Steve, but I'll share a few on our end. I mean, we've been very impressed with the degree to which platforms like Indiegogo and Kickstarter have had providing the kind of project support. You actually mentioned it in our pregame warm-up. And I think the point here is it's an example of a modest policy intervention. We're not talking about massive taxpayer dollars or massive new regulation. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's actually simplifying the notion of commonwealth, the neighborly function. If we can pool our resources for a political campaign or pool our resources for a charitable cause, we might be able to pool our resources to get some of these companies off the ground. And as the cost of launching a new business, especially those that are taking advantage of the internet ecosystem, as the cost to launch a new business falls dramatically, the potential for some of these platforms to have impact is just incredible. So this is really, I think it's more a story about smart planning and smart government in the context of this wasn't really a concept that had been in place even at the time they were building some of these consumer protections. So I think the premise here is not we found the one solution and we're going to impose it on the country. It's rather we found an opportunity that looks promising. Let's get out of the way in a thoughtful and structured way, and let's do so in a manner that sees what might come out of it. It's I think has great promise and potential, but the great news about it is it's not like we're directing everybody to pursue this one tool. It's just we want to add one more tool to the toolkit. I don't know, Steve.
Yeah, I think that add to that it's a very important way to provide capital to entrepreneurs. A lot of companies get started with kind of friends and family money, getting $100 here and $500 there, but that only gets you so far. And there's a big gap between that and sort of the traditional venture capitalists who are looking for companies that are sometimes a little bit further along. So crowdfunding platforms really weren't possible before. It really required the ubiquity of the internet and some of the reputation, transparency, trust capabilities that are now embedded in the platforms on the internet. But it's really a way to create a marketplace for people with good ideas who right now don't necessarily have access to capital, and people who are willing to invest in ideas, particularly invest in companies that want to grow in America and do innovative things. How do you bring them together while at the same time doing it in a way that preserves reasonable protection? So having the right kind of limitations. I think the White House proposal this week said that people should be able to invest, for example, up to $10,000 or 10% of their income, just to put the right kind of protection on it. But there are a lot of companies who could get 300 or 500 or 1,000 people to each put $5,000 or $10,000 into an idea. Some of those won't be successful, but some of them may end up being very successful. So it opens up the investment process to a broader group, helps a lot of entrepreneurs start and scale their companies, and does it in a way that's has appropriate levels of consumer protection. So I applaud the work of the White House. It builds on work that's already in place, and a number of people have proposed this in Congress, both the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats over the past year. So this really is something that has bipartisan support, so should be part of the Startup America legislative package that I mentioned hopefully will get passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the President in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. I think this is something that is a new concept for a lot of members of Congress. It's passed the House. I think the Senate has been working with us on trying, as Steve said, to find a degree of the investor protection so that we can let this new form of democratic, a broadly based form of capital formation take place, unleash the potential, the entrepreneurship, and yet be able to provide some guarantee, some protection that this isn't going to be an easy source for those who want to do ill, as opposed to those who have big ideas and want to grow and create jobs. And we're working through those important details. But again, I do think this is one of the type of things we could actually see get done this year.
Hey, one more quick story. I remember after the president released it, the guys that funded or started WeFunder, I think in Boston, launched a petition who would pledge to provide up to $1,000 for startups. And in less than a week, I think they've attracted $4 million in pledges. That just is the beginning of what I think is an opportunity. And I see Eric Reese in the corner, if that's who I can see there. Let's apply those lean startup principles to bring out the creative juices of the American people.
It couldn't be more exciting.
Hey, Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Hey guys, it's an honor to be with you. I thought it would be really useful. I talk a lot to entrepreneurs about the possibility of working with the government. Fulfilling Tim O'Reilly's idea of the government as platform, and I'm just wondering. Let's be honest. I encounter a lot of skepticism on the part of entrepreneurs that there's anything really going on, that this is anything more than PR. And I thought it might be helpful if you guys would talk about some of the internal innovation and startup things. I know things like Green Button, Blue Button that are actually starting to work in a different way inside the government.
Well, Eric, I might use this as a chance to just share a story for others that may not know this. When we were launching the new agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, one of our theories was that we should run the agency like a startup. And so my deputy chief technology officer, Eugene Wong, was dispatched over to help the agency get started. And we had dinner with Eric and a group of folks from California. to get ideas on how to apply some lean startup principles to government. And just as an example, the president this week unveiled a homeowner's bill of rights. In fact, Gene helped bring to life a set of policies that are really important for the American homeowner. And one of the first elements of that bill of rights was a simplified mortgage disclosure form. And the story, though, is more of the lean startup mentality. The agency, in order to get to the simplified disclosure form, rather than just relying on Washington insiders to give us feedback, opened it up to the American people and opened up essentially, pick your favorite mortgage form. They put 2 forms up on the website, know before you owe. They allowed the customers to click on the sites and to create input as to whether or not there are certain features that worked and didn't work. Tens of thousands of Americans provided that input. We've gone through 9 rounds of iteration on the form, and in the spirit of Eric's thinking, that dinner conversation led to that philosophy that we went live with, and you saw the president highlight that form just this week. And as you mentioned, liberating data from utilities through green button that allows an individual using federally governed standards, or I should say convened standards, on how to get your energy information in 1-hour increments by pushing a simple green button, in one weekend led to like 150 developers building products just on that piece of data alone. So green button in energy, blue button in healthcare, and we just announced with Secretary Arne Duncan an initiative on my data, not a color, but my data for parents and families for assessment information in schools. So that's the spirit of this. I don't know if Gene or Steve want to say a word or two about how we can take advantage of some of these resources in Washington.
Yeah, I think I understand the skepticism people have, but frankly, any entrepreneur understands that one, because we're out talking about their idea, trying to raise money. Most of the people they talk to are skeptical. They never really believe. I remember we started AOL back in 1985. It was one of the first companies. Nobody believed at the time would ever want to do these things. We had something like 3% of people online at the time, and everybody thought our team was crazy to be focusing on this. And when we were talking about someday we thought everybody would be connected and be multiple devices, and email and e-commerce would be part of everyday life. In the 1980s, people thought we were crazy and were very skeptical. So I understand that. And frankly, personally, when I was asked 1.5 years ago to join the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, but I was skeptical of exactly what they would do, but they put out some really great work around access to capital, including things around crowdfunding and IPOs. And 1 year ago, I was asked by the White House to chair the Startup America Partnership, and I said, happy to consider it, but what exactly are we going to do here? And I wanted to make sure there was a component around policy, and talk to the president and Gene and Aneesh and Karen Mills, who heads the SBA, and Valerie Jarrett and others, and they really made a commitment to that, then launched the Jobs Council. And there's been a key focus there around high growth entrepreneurship. So I understand the skepticism, but in my experience the last 1.5 years is people are taking this seriously. They do recognize that entrepreneurship is a secret sauce that's built our nation, and they are very focused on making sure we have the right pro-entrepreneurship policies in place, whether it be what Congress can do or what the administration can do on its own, and they've already taken some steps with the SBA and the Patent Office, and what the private sector can do, which is what the point of the Startup America Partnership effort is. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but I feel good about the progress over the last 1.5 years. But it's good to keep that skepticism, make sure everybody's focused on really pushing the envelope of what's possible here.
Yeah, I mean, this is Gene. I think there's, what we're doing to actually promote entrepreneurship. And of course, I don't blame people for being skeptical about Washington right now. This is not the highest point of functionality in the United States Congress, with a very divided Congress. But on the other hand, as we've said, I think the fact that you have the United States Congress aware, debating, thinking about passing something like a crowdfunding piece of legislation about, after many, many years now, having taking steps to reduce the decline in IPOs among small companies, which used to be 80% of IPOs, but now is perhaps 20%. The kind of constant focus on this, and then, or even just expanding the ability to get finance and capital, particularly after banks started to freeze up. All of these show, I think, a real commitment. Now, in terms of the government, Aneesh is right. We have some abilities to show some startup behavior, but also think about, the president talks about we can't wait, and it's really a challenge to all of us in the administration elsewhere to think really exactly about how do you apply a bit of entrepreneurship to what can be done without necessarily having something pass the United States Congress. Startup America. This is an ability of a president to go out and rally people to start an effort, to get somebody as devoted as Steve Case and Scott Case to take it over, and then to have 17 regional partnerships, all of these funds coming in. This is, Startup America is a startup. It is an act of entrepreneurship and innovation of how government can and a president can play a convening role. And I also just say, I was here for all 8 years during the Clinton administration. What you see from this team that's putting this on, Macon Phillips and others, is just constant innovation in transparency, democracy, participation. It's inspiring to me to come back into the White House 8-10 years later and see this being driven by people who were probably 5 years old the last time I was in the government. And whether it's what we're doing today or we the people, the fact that this White House essentially frees them to lead us, to come up with innovative ways to communicate, to increase democracy, exactly what President Obama talked about when he ran. These are not, believe me, these are not orders coming down from the 53-year-olds here. These are the 25-year-olds saying, here's what we're doing unless someone's got a major objection. And usually we don't, or we could, or they are implementing before we could even come up with one.
All right, well, I'm going to just ask one more question for each of you to answer. A ton of folks on the White House Google Plus page have been asking about young people and entrepreneurship, young people that are interested in their own startups or sort of just looking for a place to start. To Jean, Aneesh, and Steve, what's your message to young people that are curious about their opportunities in this field?
One thing I think, I'm going to go back to something Aneesh was saying earlier, and again, I'm dating myself as somebody who was here back in the 90s, but it is interesting that on this whole issue of your student loans, we heard this in the 90s. People were not getting the education they wanted. They were worried about crushing debt, or they were not always pursuing some of the more public-minded jobs because they had crushing debt. It is fascinating to see the degree now that people care about this because they want to, particularly as they're young, take chances. They don't want the shackles of their debt to make them have to meet a certain payment every month that would keep them from doing something innovative and creative when they're willing to live low on the hog for a while to build something. And so the fact that we now have an improved income contingent loan program, and what that means basically is you only have to pay a percentage as opposed to a certain amount. So if you're making very little for a while because you're starting your own company, that is something that you see your government actually encouraging taking risks, encouraging being willing to do what's really has been defining in the United States, which is that we're a place that celebrates people who failed 3 times and got it right on the 4th time. And I think you see more of the energy for that, the concern about the ability to try to come up with new types of financing, make it easier for people coming out of school to do so. There's just so much more energy, I think, coming into us about youth entrepreneurship. And I think that's one of the reasons that you see the reaction and energy coming out of the White House and Congress now.
So I just add to that the part of this is celebrating entrepreneurship and really making them American heroes. And I think people see when Steve Jobs, for example, passed away, the mourning all around the country, really all around the world for what he did and how he contributed to the world is young people coming up saying, I want to be like Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg, who's obviously created Facebook this week. They're in the news because of their IPO. I realized he wasn't even born when I started AOL. So a lot has changed. I'm a little bit more in the gene camp here. And Mark told me when I first met him a few years ago, that he learned programming by hacking into the AOL system. He just wanted to apologize for that. But he took that idea and scaled it. And again, it's an inspiration to a lot of other people. So some of it is having that inspirational messaging, and that's why the president, last week in the State of the Union, talking about entrepreneurship and how it really is the story of America, I think is important. I'd couple that, though, with two things. One is there are entrepreneurship education programs. Junior Achievement does some other things, some things. The organization called NIFTY, NFTE, does some things, and many others. So I'd look for those on the web. But also very important is encouraging people in the middle school and certainly high school to focus on these STEM topics around engineering, math, and so forth. Those are really the jobs and the skills of the future, because we're moving to a more technology-enabled world. So some combination of celebrating entrepreneurship and creativity and innovation and risk-taking as a core national value, and our entrepreneurs are themselves national heroes, trying to figure out ways to instill that and expose people at schools all around the country relatively early through some of these educational programs, and particularly inspiring people to take on these subjects around engineering and math, which really are the best jobs of the future, but also will result in unleashing the next wave of entrepreneurship for our nation.
And can I add one thing, or two things actually? One, I just want to let people know that on SBA.gov, or Small Business Administration.gov, there is a youth entrepreneur website that does go through resources, how to plan, mentors, options for financing. That's one thing I wanted to say. And the second thing I wanted to mention is, when I was outside of government, I was really privileged to be a startup myself, but it was a startup in creating a center that helped advocate for education in the poorest countries. And as part of that, I went to a lot of social entrepreneur convening sessions. And I think one of the other things that's so exciting right now, and I really want to stress, is not just the daring entrepreneurs out there doing new technology, trying to create a business, but also the people who have taken that spirit towards reducing poverty, to better teaching, to one person I know who's set up camp in Nairobi, Kenya, and is trying to do affordable toilets in the worst slums really in the planet. That entrepreneurial spirit is very important. And the fact that now so many people, when they come out and decide what they want to do as public service, or they want to address an important social problem, instead of them thinking simply what exists now, how can I get a low-level job there, how many people are taking that entrepreneurial spirit to think, how can I make sure poor 3-year-olds are reading by 5? How can I make sure kids that have fallen behind are getting after-school treatment? My younger brother runs a Mosaic Youth Theater Group in Detroit, how they're getting African-American kids from neighborhoods that don't have a lot of opportunities to have those opportunities through theater that then helps them go to college and grow. I mean, these are some of the greatest entrepreneurs out there, and I think it's just important to see how much that entrepreneurial spirit has now gone over into the public service realm as well.
And Corey, perhaps I might just round it out with 3 simple words: be like Mike. And you might want to say, what does that mean? The story is, it's Mike Krieger, the founder, one of the co-founders of Instagram. So, the First Lady invited him, well, the president invited him to join the First Lady in her box at the State of the Union. But more important than that, when Mike was a student, just finished college, he was thinking about how to train himself to become an iPhone app developer. What he did was he used open government data. He pulled crime data from the city of San Francisco that built an open government portal like the federal government's version, data.gov. He built an app, Crime Maps, I believe it was called, showed it to his co-founder, inspired some confidence in his co-founder that the guy knows what he's doing to build an iPhone app. And here we are. They're the app of the year in iTunes. They're growing leaps and bounds. They're hiring people. It's because he engaged in a process to solve problems, in this case, crime in the city of San Francisco, using open government data, which is freely available. And I think that story of be like Mike, tinker in health, tinker in education, tinker in energy. We're opening up these data sets and encouraging the private sector to open them up too. If you play and demonstrate, you can do some of these things. Perhaps you can both create a business in the same field or an adjacent one because you've built those skills. So be like Mike.
One last point before we leave. I just wanted to thank Aneesh for what he's done. As some of you know, he's been the Chief Technology Officer for the United States for the last several years, but leaving his last day is next week. He's done a great job and with enthusiastically talking about the role of technology and reinventing government, how you open up these data to other people, but also been a great advocate and partner in a lot of these entrepreneurship initiatives. So just want to thank Aneesh for his leadership. We really all appreciate it.
You're very kind. Thank you so much, Steve.
And now next week you can be like Mike. You'll be out of a job.
Well, we did have Eugen join late. We were on our last question. Do you want to do a fire round for one more? Eugen?
Thank you. I joined late. Just wanted to maybe ask this: how do you connect people like Mike to the mentors?
I'll defer that to Steve. One of the benefits of the Startup America Partnership is it's creating these regional ecosystems where mentors are joining. I was at the launch of Startup Virginia with Steve, and hundreds of folks came into the room, and leaders in the community offered to be supportive of entrepreneurs. Those regions are a great place, Steve, if you want to say a word about that.
Yeah, there are, as I said before, there are some. First of all, look at the startupamericapartnership.org website. You also, if you can't remember all that, it's s.co. We've also, that domain, we'll get to that site. And there you'll see some of the resources at a national level. But we really think, particularly around mentoring, a lot of the real action is at the local or regional level. So that's why we've been launching these different regional sites and trying to really, evangelize the importance of entrepreneurship and get people working together. Often there's interesting activities that exist, but people don't know about them or they haven't really been scaled up. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're trying to take great organizations that already exist, that are providing great services, connect them to entrepreneurs that need those resources, and help them scale up by partnering with other organizations, larger companies, what have you. So it really is an acceleration effort trying to really take everything to the next level. Mentoring is obviously very important. People talk about the need for capital or talent. We didn't get into that, but the whole issue of high-skilled immigration and making sure we have access to the right engineers and entrepreneurs are important. But ultimately, getting the advice you need to figure out what decisions to make as you're starting and growing a company is important. Mentoring obviously is a key part of that and a key focus of the Startup America Partnership.
All right, well, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join. Thanks to Jean, Steve, and Aneesh for joining us for this Hangout. Stay tuned. The whole video will be posted on whitehouse.gov later on, and look forward to more White House Hangouts.
Let's start up America.
Yes, right. Thank you.
Thank you all. See you
An
later.
economy that's built to last.
Making it in America.
In the future.
Aloha.